Hey guys, it's Alex, and this starts my rereadathon vlog for January. I decided I'd do sort of like a rereading vlog each time I do a reread for the rereadathon. All the info for the rereadathon will be linked below. If you haven't already heard of it or joined in, we would love to have you. We're rereading one book every month for the entire year of 2019. January's challenge is to reread a book that was a first for you, and I'm actually planning to read or reread a whole series. And that series is The Song of the Lioness by Tamora Pierce. There are 4 books, it's a quartet, and it looks like a lot to read. I'm planning to read it all this weekend, but they're very short books. I mean, they're thick as a whole, but the font is like very large, so I'm really not worried about getting through these at all. Plus, they're old favorites, and I know how quickly I read them. Like, I can get through all 4 of these in a weekend. What I kind of decided to do was I wanted to talk about what I remember from these books and sort of what I'm expecting going in and what I'm sort of forgotten about them, I guess. I haven't read these books in particular since high school. I've read or reread some Tamora Pierce books since then, and I do still really enjoy her, but this was the first series that I'd ever read by her. I really loved these books. I started reading them when I was in middle school, and I never really had read high fantasy before them, which is why I chose them as a first, and also because this is called the first adventure, so it's a double first. It's a literal first. Before I'd read these, I'd read some high fantasy, I'd read some fantasy in general. I'd read Aragon, I don't know if I'd read The Mortal Instruments before this or not, but these were sort of the first that I fell in love with, and I really adored them. But I've been thinking about these books lately, and what I should hold them. That's a lot to hold up. What I remember from these books is the characters and the relationships. And these are fairly typical high fantasy. They have the typical high fantasy plots, and I remember aspects of the plots, but they're not really what stood out to me. Like, I remember Alanna. I remember her relationship with Jonathan, and her relationship with George, and Liam, and I remember Fayette a little bit. I'm probably pronouncing half these names really wrong. I remember her brother Tom, and I remember the Duke, I believe he was, but I don't remember a lot of what was actually happening around them so much as I remember their relationships. So I feel like that's going to be very interesting for me going into these books. Because there's so many specific things I remember, but all of the specifics are pretty much specifically about the relationships or the characters, and there's not much about the action. I know there was a war that happened in which book? Was it this one? I think there was a war that happened in this book, and I really don't remember who it was with or what it was about. I just remember Alanna and Jonathan and their relationship during this war. I remember the climax at the end a little bit. I remember her cat Faithful, but it's like, I know there's so much more to these books, because what I remember would not even fit in, one book. What I remember is essentially a romance novel. And these books aren't. Like, there's romance in them, but it's never the center point. And I don't know, like, it's gonna be really interesting, because what I don't enjoy about fantasy so much is sort of the big action. And I do remember that these have a lot of that big action. Like the war with, like, the final showdown at the end, and Raising the Dead, although I don't know that Raising the Dead was so much in this one as it was in, like, previous books or other series that Tamora Pierce has written. So I'm very excited to get started on these. It is Friday the 25th, and I kind of plan to get through all of these this weekend and just have a whole weekend of rereads, and I will probably post updates. Maybe after each book, maybe just when I have really important things to say, but I'm very excited to start reading these. Today is Saturday, the second day of my weekend rereading, which, I don't know, maybe I'll do like a weekend of rereading for like some months in the future in case anyone wants to do their rereading at the same time as me. But I read the first 2 books of the Song of the Lioness quartet. I almost said the Alanna quartet. I read the first 2 books. I haven't started book 3 yet, but I kind of figured today would be like, or right now would be like a really good like wrap up, because I'd forgotten, but the way these 2 books wrap up, it kind of like cuts the series in half almost. Like, if you wanted, you could read these 2 books and stop, and it would feel like a complete series with like how it ends, which I wasn't expecting. Like, I'd sort of forgotten the ending of this one, like, not forgotten it, but like, it wasn't as clear what exactly it was. And oh god, I just remembered how much like 12-year-old me was just shook to the core after reading this, because like that was back when like the only fantasy I'd really read was Harry Potter. I'd read like the first Aragon book, but I hadn't really liked that. So having it in such this dramatic big climax scene of like death and mayhem and destruction was like, I didn't know books could do that. I read a lot of YA contemporary, and like people don't die in YA contemporaries unless it's like car accidents or cancer. I wasn't I wasn't prepared for this as a 12-year-old. As an adult, I gave this 5 stars. I thought this was stunning. This like is such an amazing middle grade book. This I gave 4 stars. It's still fantastic. Like, I'm not trying to say it's not a fantastic book and I don't love it, because I absolutely adore both of these. But this, I had a lot more troubles with the romance. I'd forgotten sort of how the romance was built up in this book. It's not bad. It's just, this book has no romance. There's no hint of romance. It's a straight middle grade novel. She's, like 12. There's no romance. This follows her from like age 15 to 18, and there's a lot of romance. This is very heavy on the romance. I actually added the romance tag on Goodreads because of how much romance there was. And I don't dislike the fact that there is romance. I actually love the romance in this series, but in this book in particular, it was very heavy-handed. It was very in your face. It was very sudden. It took like sort of precedence over other things in the story, and it just seemed out of nowhere. Like, it wasn't built up enough. It was just sudden romance, and I don't know. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. But I'd also forgotten how sassy Alanna is. Alanna is so sassy in these books, especially this one. Just, she's got a tongue on her. She's got a sharp tongue. She's not afraid to use it, and it's kind of amazing. I think overall, I'm just not surprised at how good these books hold up, because I did expect that. But I was kind of worried going in that these were just going to be like a bunch of 4-star reads, and I'd be like, they're really good, but a lot of nostalgia. And they are so much nostalgia for me. Like, I'm not denying that. Part of the reason I do love these books so much is because of the nostalgia. But it's not just that. It's a lot of... they're really good. They're really good. Like, I would love to recommend these as, like, non-romance, because they do start out that way, but they get so romance-heavy later on that I, like, can't do that, and you can't just, like, stop after this one. You could stop after this one, but this one has so much romance that it doesn't really matter. But I also wasn't really surprised that I didn't love this one as much. Like, it's not bad. I'm not trying to say it's bad. I love it. It's 4-star. Just, I love it. But looking back on these books, this one I remember slightly less than this one. This one I remember, like, the whole thing. It's amazing. Like, I absolutely adore it. This, I remember a few key points, but not a lot else. Like, I was reading it like, oh, I remember this line. I remember that. Like, obviously reading it, I remember the whole thing, but if you'd asked me to pick points out of it, I probably could have told you a little bit about the ending and the war. And that was pretty much it. Like, I didn't remember a lot of the specifics, and I do think it's because this book isn't quite as strong. But I'm very much looking forward to reading books 3 and 4, because they get a lot older, and that's when I really remember enjoying the romance so much and really being invested in, like, her relationships, both romance and otherwise, and the introduction of a few new characters. And I'm just very excited to continue, because I'm absolutely adoring this reread. And honestly, I haven't yet used a bookmark for these books. Like, I just pick them up and read them straight through, and then take a break, and then read the next one straight through. So I really haven't put these down. These were one sitting reads, both of them. They both took about 2 hours. They're very, very short, quick reads. The 4th one is a bit longer, but I adore these. If you like older fantasy, if you don't mind a little romance heavy in your fantasy, these are amazing. My Sunday update is that I have finished The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, which is the 3rd book, and I have made some progress on book number 4, which I will probably finish tonight, and I will probably update you guys on Monday. But this one I wanted to talk about specifically, first because this is the romance that I remember really loving from this book. It's not that it's a particularly different romance, it includes the same people, but it's so well done. Like, the romance complements this book in a way that it didn't complement in The Hand of the Goddess. And it really adds to the story and makes the story feel more full instead of like distracting from it. And I do really love that. And I really love the way the characters change within the relationship and how the romance impacts the story in a way that isn't just them being together or not. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that something I didn't notice the first time I read this book was the amount of white savior trope that it kind of contains. And I don't think, I mean, it's a bad thing, obviously. Like, that's not a good trope. It's something I've noticed in some other Tamora Pierce books. I have, especially the Trickster's Choice duology. I read those when I was a bit older, and I didn't really think about it so much in this book. I still gave it 5 stars, and I think the reason I didn't knock it down a star for the white savior trope, and the reason it didn't bother me as much as it has in certain other books, is because Alanna does show up to this village. She does make a lot of changes in the village, and she does kind of talk negatively about the way women are treated in the village. But it's also the kind of thing where she comes to the realization at some point that these women aren't just these poor, subjugated, afraid women, you know, like they have their own strength. They kind of accept that the men do the things they do, and they're like, well, you know, it's men. Like, they do their own thing, and they're not afraid. The women wear veils, and Alanna doesn't like that because Alanna doesn't wear a veil, and she has 2 young girls who are her students who wear veils, and she tries at several points to get them to take their veils off, and she always loses the argument. Like, the girls refuse, and the book kind of ends, or that plotline ends with the girls having refused, and the girls being okay with wearing their veils, and that being part of their strength, and, or not strength, but like, that's something that's important to them, and they stick with that. So I think for that reason, for those 2 reasons, I'm kind of like, not okay with the white savior trope, but it's not something that's as impactful or as negative as it otherwise could be. But it is something that I do wish to like discuss within this book, because that definitely is a flaw, and it is something that like deserves to be discussed. But I have started reading Lioness Rampant, which is the 4th book. I'm really enjoying it so far. It does have kind of a slow start. It's something I remember is not being quite as interested in the beginning part of this book, but I remember the climax and just like it being so intense, so I'm really looking forward to that. And just as a side note, this cover is gorgeous. Like, I love how feminine she looks on the cover, because she looks fairly masculine. Like, even in this, when she's wearing like armor and stuff, she's obviously a woman, but she looks fairly masculine. In this, she just looks so feminine, and it's such like a small pointless thing, and I know it's just a cover and there are various covers, but I really love it. So it is Monday morning, and I've just gotten up, and last night I finished Lioness Rampant, which is the 4th book in the Song of the Lioness Quartet, which finishes my January reread for the Booktube Rereadathon, and I gave it 5 stars. I gave most of the books in this series 5 stars. They're just such fantastic books, and I know I say this like having the nostalgia of them and just loving them so much, but there are a lot of themes in these that I didn't recognize like the first time I read them, and not like super dramatic, like over the top themes. They're like very subtle and very adult, like very obvious themes, like Alanna exploring her femininity and things like that I really didn't pick up on the first time I read them. Like, I picked up on the literal things she was doing, but not like the overarching themes, and that was really interesting to like read that as an adult. But mostly the series is just my childhood. Like, reading these was so familiar to me, because I've read them so many times before, and I do recognize all the different lines, and I may not like remember them off the top of my head, but like reading them, they're just so familiar to me, and it's like home, you know? Like, I adore these books, and it kind of makes me sad that I've waited so many years to reread them, because I haven't reread these in like 10 years or something, and oh, it was so fantastic. Like, just such a wonderful experience. And I'm not really talking about this book specifically, because I don't really have anything to say about this book that I didn't say about the other books, but it was so much fun, and I really adored rereading them and like coming back to this story, because it's one of my favorites. let me know down below what you reread for January and like what your experiences were. If you love the books just as much, or if you discovered new things about them, or they were just a fun return for you, because I'd love to see what you guys think of your rereads and how Booktube Rereadathon has started for you. For those of you who are unaware, if you've forgotten or you're new to Booktube Rereadathon this month, the January prompt is reread an underrated book. I'm not 100% certain what I'm going to read yet, but I do know I'm going to read an Ellen Emerson White book, potentially A Season of Daring Greatly. This is kind of the one that I'm leaning towards for February, just because I don't know that I'm interested in getting into another quartet, which is what I would be reading if I reread her other book. So probably be reading this, which is a young adult contemporary, young adult / new adult contemporary about a girl who's a baseball player. And I hope you guys decide to join in on Booktube Rereadathon if you haven't already, because so far I've been having so much fun. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again soon.